Welcome to the Family Financial Conversation, an Advisorpedia-powered podcast about the decisions families make as they age that involve money, but might revolve around very different things. Listen in for thoughts from industry experts on getting the best possible outcomes from those decisions through the lens of great financial advice. We are all entering this age of longevity together. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Family Financial Conversation. I'm your host, Tom West, and with me is my friend, my colleague, Arvette Reid. I'll introduce Arvette Reid as somebody that worked in the senior housing and healthcare industry that I knew forever. And I asked her 6 years ago, Arvette, something like that, to maybe join our practice because there was so much I needed to learn and so much I thought that as a financial advisory practice, we could add to being able to be more impactful and valuable to our clients that were going through some different transitions. So, Arvette, just take a minute or two, let the audience know, who are you, where you came from, and why you might have some perspective on today's topic, which is planning for families getting together around the holidays. Arvette, before we get into holiday planning, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Super excited. I'm always so excited to talk about the things I learned over the years. So I spent 15 years working in the senior housing and healthcare network. So I worked in independent living, assisted living, dementia care, nursing care, and hospice during that 15-year span. I was always the marketing and admissions person working directly with the families, right? Having these conversations about what mom and dad may need or what your spouse or partner may need. And so during that time, no one really talked about money, right? So I would say, yes, it's going to cost you $11,000 a month and get the look of how am I going to do that, right? So when you were asking me, come join the practice, let's talk about this. At first I was like, no, that's not my background, but so glad I did. Yeah. So happy I did, because I feel like we've done so much and we've learned so much over the past 6.5 years that we've been doing this.
Yeah. Well, just remind me again, why on earth did you say yes? I'll come join you in your practice. Do you even remember?
Yeah. I was like, wow, no, this is a problem. There's a problem that needs to be solved. And that was the engineering brain in me. I have an engineering background. So there's a problem that needed to be solved and I was ready to jump in and try to solve it.
Well, so far, so good. Well, I think that let's turn our attention a little bit to the topic at hand. Why don't we start first from what you learned when you were in the senior housing and healthcare industry? How did you think about what was going to be happening for your resident, for your clients, for your patients around the holiday time?
Yeah. So in the senior housing and healthcare industry, we all know that between November and mid-November to mid-January is the time where family conversations happen, right? That's the time, if you're working in a dementia facility, all of a sudden the daughter from Arizona shows up. Or if you're even in independent living, the son and the grandkids from Alabama show up, right? So you know that you need to be prepared for talking with families about what's going on with the resident that is living in whatever community you're in, right? Mm-hmm. And we welcome that opportunity, actually. Some people are like, oh no, here they come. But the reality is we welcome that opportunity because we know that those adult children have questions, right? And so staff is ready to answer the questions. On the other side, we know sometimes that mom and dad need help. And sometimes maybe dad needs help, but mom doesn't really want to do it. And the kids come in town and the kids actually become help for us in reinforcing some of the things that need to happen or need to change. So It is a time that is hectic because it's the holidays. And you have your own personal stuff going on, right? But from a professional standpoint, it was a really key moment in the calendar year.
Yeah.
And even for my own personal, when my brother would come up from out of town to visit my parents during the holidays, he would see things because he hadn't been here. I was here every day. So I would see my parents multiple times. Right. So he could come a couple times a year and he would see the difference from 6 months ago to today. Right?
Sure. So one of the things that I think the audience can start anticipating is, listen, from the family standpoint, family is trying to define the reality that they're in right now.
Right.
And we'll talk a little bit about maybe everybody understands the reality that they're in. Maybe they don't. Maybe they accept. Maybe there's denial. Maybe there's putting on a good show.
Right.
Maybe people are overreacting a little bit. Just talk for a little bit about families accepting or denying their changing needs from a senior housing and healthcare standpoint first, and then we'll get going and talking a little bit more about financial decisions. But talk to me about some of your experience in all those different types of the care business in terms of how families really were communicating effectively or not effectively around the holidays.
Oh, no, that's great. Like family dynamics over the holidays, it can go so many different ways. And this is where I tell the audience, like, yes, I am an adult daughter first. Yeah. I'm a senior housing and healthcare professional, and I'm also a finance professional. So even though we're talking to financial professionals, you're going to be able to relate to the stuff I'm talking about because you've gone to see your parents over the holidays and have seen things,
right.
Your grandparents or your aunt, and you think about your own dynamics within your family. So there's the person that comes out of town who all of a sudden starts pounding their fist like, oh my God, this is so bad. And the person that's there is like, oh my, we're surviving just fine. So sometimes there's an automatic conflict because they don't agree on what they see. And in other cases, it's complete opposite, where someone's really been trying to do their best, and then siblings come into town or other family members come into town and help reinforce the change. So it doesn't have to be a negative time, but sometimes conflict does happen. And I was talking to a family this morning where there are 3 siblings, mom and dad's starting to have some healthcare problems. 2 of them live locally, 1 lives far away. And they're all having this conversation about, from Thanksgiving, it prompted this conversation about what do we do with mom and dad, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm on the phone with the 3 siblings, not mom and dad, trying to give them some like, hey, you can't force your mom to move. Like, you can't pick her up and move her. So there needs to be some like strategy and conversation as a family and open dialogue about what everybody feels and where everybody's thoughts are. Because that's the only way the family as a unit moves forward through conversations, right? And things to make things change.
Right. And it's worth using that example about recognizing that as healthcare circumstances change, and just as importantly, how the perceptions about those healthcare changes happen are starting to impact the way that priorities are understood. Yep. And not everybody is understanding what the healthcare is really looking like and the independence is really looking like. And sometimes people aren't in alignment on what the priorities are to begin with.
Right.
Yeah, I think that one of the pieces when we're talking about the financial aspects, I think it's important for advisors to recognize that the financial aspects of a lot of these decisions are not the first things that people are thinking about. And when we're thinking about holidays, I'm just thinking about my own family. When I've traveled, my whole family was from upstate New York. And whenever we went up to upstate New York to see my grandparents, my extended family, the most important thing was to have a happy holiday experience, right?
Yeah.
We weren't going up there to sign up for some train wreck conversation about how somebody can't do something or somebody's not being responsible or helping out. Uh-huh. But one of the pieces that I think professionals know, and you can speak to this from your senior housing and healthcare days, is, maybe the idea of observation and really good questions, and maybe get everybody to agree what they're looking at, not necessarily how they feel about what they're looking at or what they think about it or what needs to be done, but just getting some shared perspective that this is the reality that we're living in right now. In your time in senior housing and healthcare, was there any guidance that you were giving either to mom and dad projecting reality to the kids or kids trying to understand reality from mom and dad? Was there any thoughts that come to mind about, making sure that everybody's looking at things the way they are and able to say, these are the way things are?
I think, first of all, to assume that people are going to be able to come to some kind of consensus, that's really difficult, right? So whether you're a senior housing and healthcare professional like me who was looking at it, or the financial professional who I am now and who may be listening, you're on the outside, right? And you know that conversations are going to happen and things are going to get a little nasty sometimes. As a professional, the best thing you could do is just tell your client, tell those families to try to be open and have open dialogue. Sometimes they're just not going to talk. Like my mom was not a talker, like hands up, I don't want to talk about this. So we would talk about it like with my dad or my aunt, and we try to get the full story. And so when we would approach my mom, it would come from a different angle. Like, hey, dad said, like, last time you were in the kitchen, you had to use a stool, right? Or, are you having a hard time standing up in the kitchen that long? That's completely different than saying, Mom, I noticed that you're not walking well, right? Sure. Nobody wants to hear the negative thing, right? So it's all about that. So I would coach, and this is what I did with this family today, is coach with open dialogue and be able to receive whatever information that may not be what you want, but let them have the opportunity to say what they're going to say and listen, right? And that needs to go both ways.
Good takeaway. I think it's a good takeaway for family members. Like, holidays are time to receive. And holidays hopefully are time to have that good holiday experience of bringing everybody together. But holidays might not be the time to jump to conclusions or to race to a prescription of some kind. I think it's the idea of perceiving. That's probably a good piece of advice for all of the professionals that are thinking about it. So let's talk a little bit about all of the different roles that, when we're thinking about family financial conversations, that people are playing. And it seems to be there's maybe 2 or 3. We've got some of our audience are professionals, like financial advisors, attorneys, and whatnot. And what we're trying to do is to receive all of the information that we can use to understand a family's new situation and goals, and to be able to use some of our professional disciplines to think about new ways to think about cash flow or liquidity or big transitions like a move. But there's also maybe some different roles about a solo ager, or about extended family, or about children. Talk to me a little bit about ways that you've seen these things happen most functionally, maybe around the holidays and coming back and communicating internally. We've got plenty of cautionary tales, but maybe you can think of a few times of like, wow, that really worked out well. People were on the same page. What comes to mind with different roles of families and what you've seen?
So let's define what we mean by solo agers, right? I think that's a really important topic to hit on. So solo agers are individuals that may have never been married, or may have never had kids, or maybe a widow, or maybe their kids live very far away. Like, we had a client who lived here, and we had one kid that lived in Asia and one lived in Europe. So technically not a solo ager, but really a solo ager, because there was nobody around to help make decisions if anything happened, right? So that's what a solo ager is. So when it comes to the holidays, like you've mentioned before, it's really important to remember these are the holidays, families are getting together, but encourage people to pay attention. What you'll find is there are some adult children who are in town, and they will say, let's go over and see your advisor, right? Because they're starting to notice, like, dad's not paying attention to the details, and this one adult child may want to capture that moment while they're in town. So you need to be prepared for that. The other side is they're going to wait until the holidays are over, and then you're going to get a call out of the blue, right? Like, I was just there. In either case, you have your own priorities during the holidays, but you need to be ready to be reactive at that moment, because they have a concern, and there's your opportunity right then and there to show them that you are part of the team, that you are there to listen. And whatever it is, you're not, as you say, you're not prescribing when they're on the phone. When those adult children or the spouse comes to you, you need to listen and listen with empathy and say, yes, I'm going to do whatever I can to work with you and your family to figure this out. The other really important thing about this time is to remember, this is when you actually get to meet the other people in the family. So going into the holidays, it's a great time to say, hey, are your kids coming to town? I would love for them to meet them or have a call if they're in town. Feel free to swing by and just say hello. You need to open that invitation up so that there's a possibility that maybe you'll get to meet somebody you wouldn't normally get to meet.
Yeah. And I mean, so many financial advisors have had to go through trusted contact information where they're gathering, all of the background data on who might be inquiring about, somebody's finances, and certainly everything like powers of attorney or successor trustees or whatnot. So for financial advisors that are listening, this is an opportunity to meet the people who are going to be the decision makers that you should be thinking about teaming up with to make sure your primary client gets the best outcomes. But let's think a little bit defensively, like maybe from a retention standpoint. these other family members, those are the people that are going to fire you or not hire you after mom and dad pass.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we know the industry, G2 retention rates are terrible. And, we'll talk in a subsequent podcast about how the approach that we're going to be talking about in the family financial conversation directly impacts G2 retention. I believe that we've got one of the best organic G2 retention approaches, and it has to do with making sure that you've got a shared experience as an advisor to work with successor family decision makers to get best outcomes for your primary client.
Yep.
There's also another angle that's worth thinking about too, and that's the angle of the adult child or the primary parent, for example. For adult children that are listening, listen, you want to be able to meet your mom and dad or your older relative, the person that you care about, in a space that first comes from respect and care and love, and making sure that you're not diminishing them any more than you absolutely need to, but probably not at all.
Right.
Look for opportunities to give that older relative as much agency as possible. Try to find, even if they might be a little bit in denial about what their circumstances are, look for opportunities to say, listen, just in case something happens in the future, even though to your eyes it might be happening right now, in case something happens in the future, what do you want me to do if? Who do you want me to call if? And let's all rally the professionals that include financial services people or lawyers or whoever that might be. And I want you to talk a little bit, Arvette, about the power of the thing that somebody might be most hopeful for and why that is an incredibly powerful thing to rally family members around for financial advisors and for best outcomes. But talk a little bit about why you focus on the hopeful, which isn't even necessarily the most probable.
Right. No, that's a big one. So when you think about having conversations with clients, you've already done this. Like, what are you planning for? Are you planning for grandkids' graduation or, education? Are you planning for a new house? What are you planning for? Most people don't talk about what are you planning for, not necessarily in retirement, but as you age and things happen. So in the healthcare world, like when things happen, people are saying, okay, you can no longer stay home. You can no longer drive. You now have to do this. It's all coming from kind of like a negative context. Like you're getting older and things are changing.
And things are getting taken away, right?
Taken away. So it's really important when you're dealing with your older clients or even some of your younger clients that might have a new diagnosis. I mean, people get diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 45, right? So we're not always talking about the 80-year-old.
Right.
So it could be anybody going through any healthcare change. Part of building that relationship and keeping that relationship going is adjusting to their new circumstance. So instead of just diving into the money, but dive into, wow, now that this has changed, like, what are you most hopeful for? How can I support you in the things that you want?
Right.
Because everybody else in their life is saying, especially the adult children who are panicking, like, mom, dad, you got to do this. The doctors in the hospital are like, now you got to take this new med. So here's an opportunity in the healthcare world. Like back to the days over the holidays, we knew the kids and the families were coming. We welcomed them with open arms and built that relationship because we knew when things happen and we had to communicate, it wouldn't be the first time in an emergency.
Right.
So take the time to really just listen from family members and people and really understand what their hopes are based on their new circumstance, new diagnosis, and whatever change they have.
Right. And
it'll
for
change
all
your
of us,
relationship.
Yeah. And for all of us, professionals and family members alike, this idea of coming from a place of hope, this isn't just touchy-feely stuff. This is as much science as anything else, because we know when somebody is getting agency taken away from them, if they're being diminished as a decision maker, as a father, as a whatever their roles are going to be.
Right.
Everybody, whether it's very conscious or subconsciously, they're going to get their back up. They're going to resist. This is not acceptable. This is not who I am. This is not my identity. This is not where my responsibilities are. And that provoking fear of things being taken away, like your identity or agency, it creates very specific brain conditions, which are hugely researched. You get cortisol washes. You go fight or flight. You become very reactive.
Yeah.
What Arvette's talking about with trying to find acceptance of understanding the reality that you're living in, and even if it's a little bit of a lessened ability, acceptance where that is, and given the situation you're in right now, what are the things that you're most hopeful for where you are right now? Because there's always something to be hopeful for right now. We know that captures imagination. It captures love and feelings and relationships and parts of the way that we process information that is entirely different from the fear response.
Yep.
When we're trying to get in the room, financial advisors, okay, you want to not go to the fear place. Even if you're talking with a panicked adult child, you want to go for what are the things that you're most hopeful for in trying to help mom out with this new circumstance.
Right.
And listen very carefully to what that is. If you've got a solo ager, what are the things that you're most hopeful for? To be able to have that conversation, recognize that you as a professional or as a family member, you are distinct. You are standing out. You are the person that is on their side.
Right.
You're shoulder to shoulder with them, with whatever they're facing. You're not taking something away from them. That one piece, that one positioning, going into the things where you're thinking about the holidays, of just coming at this, of receiving, trying to get the right information and listening for things to be hopeful for. That's one of the best groundings that you can have when you put on your professional hat and you start using your discipline, your education, your skills, and the resources that you've got to start helping make some better financial decisions. But you got to be able to bring it all the way back. The reason we're doing the thing is because this is what we're most hopeful for. And even if that's not probable for the long run, you have to get behind that first, and then maybe you come up with a plan B or a plan C. And even if plan B and plan C really is the way it's going to go, don't ever get away from plan A as the place to engage, as the place to stay on the side of a retiree that might be going through some changes.
Well, I think it's important for a visual. That door opens if you say, I'm going to work with you. Let's be hopeful. What do you want? The instant you don't do that, the door closes and your access to the rest of the family and your access to information as things changes goes away.
Yeah.
So you have to start it so that the door is open. You're considered part of the flow of conversation over time.
Right. And I think that's part of the way, one of our closing thoughts, I think that's part of the reason that advisors do such a crummy job of holding on to these relationships past a primary financial decision maker. I think that even though families might intellectually understand, hey, we gotta take things away, we gotta be afraid, we gotta hunker down, we gotta make somebody safe.
Right.
There's a resistance, I think, when you see somebody in the family being diminished, even if it's not their own fault. And I don't want to have anything to do with that particular chapter. But if this is somebody that is putting themselves in the position to rally around the new most important thing, and I use that phrase and I'm going to use it again, the new most important thing is the thing that you're hopeful for right now. And if you use that language, that's hugely powerful. So, Arvette, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining us on this particular holiday edition of the Family Financial Conversation. Find us on the Family Financial Conversation Center of Excellence at advisorpedia.com. And we'll talk again soon, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Family Financial Conversation podcast. The information covered in the posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. Disclosure: Signature Estate and Investment Advisors, LLC, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. However, such registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and no inference to the contrary should be made. Securities offered through Signature Estate Securities, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through SCIA, LLC, 2121 Avenue of the Stars, Suite 1600, Los Angeles, California, 90016. Telephone number 310-712-2323.